Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to do a comparison between a wet palette and a traditional old school palette. And if you don't know what a wet palette is, I'm going to show you in a second. While you're here, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment. It will really help my artist journey and growth. Thank you so much. Well, we all know what traditional palette is, right? It's your ceramic tins I have here. Some artists use a butcher's pen. I have also a mixing palette. Recently, I discovered wet palette. So I did a little bit digging online and end up with this brand. This is Nick Pro Artist Paint Palette. I'll leave the link in the description, but this is something I got from Temu, so it doesn't cost too much. And they have the exact same product on Amazon, but I end up ordering on Temu. But it depends on your situation, your location. You might want to look in both places and do a little bit comparison yourself. So this is what it looks like on the inside. It comes with a pack of mixing paper. It has 100 sheets, so it should last you a while, and a couple pads of foam board. This palette is awesome because it has a cover, so it kind of prevents the paint from drying, although the foam underneath should help that. And it comes with a mixing board, which as you can see I haven't used, and then a bottom tray, which is where you load the water. So I'm going to set this up, load this up, and show you what happens. So once you have a palette set up, you're ready to paint. You load your paint on here, squeeze out all the palettes you're gonna use for any particular painting. You squeeze it on and you can mix on the palette, normally like adding water and whatnot. But the magical part about this palette is that because the wet tray at the bottom, it keeps the gouache paint moist throughout the whole process. If you have experience with gouache paint, you know that the paint itself, as well as the paint on your brush, dries so fast. It dries as we speak, so you have to work really fast, right? And I find myself have to constantly mix new paint as it dries and adding a little bit of water to it, which a lot of times dilutes the paint immediately, and then I had to go back and add more paint to get that creamy consistency. It wastes a lot of time. It's also very frustrating because it seems like I can never get the same color again a lot of times. So this wet palette kind of solves that problem. I've used it like a bunch of times now, and what I find the negative side of this wet palette is that if you leave the paint overnight, the next day when you open it again, all the paint you have on it has absorbed all the water from the bottom overnight and makes whatever paint on top so watery that you have to remix the consistency again. So it kind of has the opposite problem as a traditional palette. A traditional palette, it dries so quickly that you have to mix the water back in. But the plus side of a traditional palette is that when it dries the next day, you have to be careful about mixing a little bit of water in to get the paint back. So I've used the wet palette and went back to my traditional palette, and now I am doing a comparison because I feel like both have pros and cons, and the wet palette doesn't solve all my problems. Both the wet palette and traditional palette has the exact opposite problem, where the wet palette gets too wet the next day and then the dry palette gets too dry. So I guess it comes down to your painting process and how fast you paint, right? If you know that you're going to finish a painting in one setting, then I absolutely recommend a wet palette because you can pretty much use the paint the entire session without having to worry about it drying out on the palette at least. If you are someone like me who paints multiple sessions over a few days, then I actually find that the traditional palette is a little easier to control because I know how much water I can add back in. Whereas the wet palette, when it gets wet, it just does. There's nothing I can do about it. And the only solution really is to use a new sheet of paper, which I'm sure that's why it has 100 sheets come with it, and you can also buy that sheet separately. The issue with that is when I squeeze paint out, most of the time I have all these leftover paints on the palette that I don't really just want to throw away and start a new sheet. So I hope that is helpful for you to make a decision on if you want to go ahead and use wet palette or stay with the traditional palette. But my suggestion is also just experiment depending on the way you paint, your speed, etc. You might find one suits you better than another, and I don't think there's any harm in experimenting with a new art tool. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any experience with both, leave me a comment and let me know how you like both and what the pros and cons for you. Thank you so much.